Well, this is a pleasure to be able to present to you. And I'm going to share my screen now. Got it. Okay. Hopefully you can see my screen.
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, we're going to try this again. There we go. Now you can, right?
Yes, we can.
Great. All right. Well, again, thank you for inviting me. This is a pleasure to tell you a little bit about what we're doing at Catoctin Furnace. So I titled this talk, Reparative Heritage, We Too Are the Village, because our mission at Catoctin Furnace is to bring to light, if you will, the history of individuals who have been forgotten and whose memory has been obfuscated throughout history at Catoctin Furnace. Catoctin Furnace really does lack a collective memory that includes the African-American population. And this is particularly disturbing because the furnace, the principal workers and the original workers, if you will, at Catoctin Furnace were African-American. The furnace is located in Western Maryland in Frederick County. It's about 7 miles north of the city of Frederick and just south of Thurmont. This map shows you a layout of the village. And what I think is particularly interesting is you can see the worker houses that extend along the road, and then the actual furnace complex, the enslaved quarters, the ironmasters' mansions. And it's interesting to note that the village is literally ringed by mansions. These are mansions built in the late 18th and early 19th century that would have been at home in Annapolis or Baltimore or Philadelphia, but they're out in the middle of, frankly, nowhere. And they really make a statement about the great wealth that the owners of the furnace were able to produce because, of course, they were not paying their workers. Their workers were enslaved. So this artist's rendition of the furnace gives you an idea of the complex, the worker houses off to the left, the furnace complex in the middle, and then behind it on the mountain, the collier pits, the collier hearths, and of course the ore pit. So it was a very compact but very self-sufficient complex in which people lived and worked, and in the case of Catoctin, died as well, and we'll talk about that in a minute. We know a great deal about the owners. Thomas Johnson was the first governor of Maryland. His brothers were very much part of the operation. One was a financier, one was a lawyer. Of course, Thomas was a politician and a lawyer. And then another brother was in London, and he was a shipping magnate. So again, the family is very well documented, but the enslaved are almost, we know almost nothing about them. And that's one of the principal questions, if you will, that we've been asking ourselves. What can we find? What sort of reparative heritage can we bring to bear here so that the people who actually lived and worked at Catoctin can be seen, if you will, again? At the time of the Johnsons, there were between 15 and 20 stone and log houses built. And in the mid-19th century, at the height of the furnace, there were up to 80. And so we ask ourselves who built them, who lived in them, and what can we learn about that? The iron furnace was a 12,000 plus acre operation. Most of the acreage was used to produce charcoal. Charcoal was the fuel for the furnace. The mountain also provided water power in the form of the streams. Little Hunting Creek is the name of the stream that powered the water wheel, which opened and closed the two bellows and produced the heat then or the power, if you will, that produced the heat to produce the iron. Making charcoal is a very specialized skill. In Africa, women were the primary charcoalers or colliers. Here in the United States, the colonies in the young United States, men and women lived in the mountains and made the charcoal. It was a tending sort of operation. The hearth would burn. First of all, it had to be stacked, cut and stacked in a very specific way, and then covered with clay in a reduced oxygen atmosphere. And then it had to be tended for up to 2 weeks in order to produce the charcoal. So again, a very specialized operation. We have analyzed LIDAR, post-processed, I guess is the best way to put it, LIDAR from the mountain. And we've been able to identify over 1,000 charcoal hearths on the mountain. And they're connected by paths that you can see on these bare earth LIDAR images. But they also we've been able to demonstrate that they were used over and over again and about a 30-year period. This is what a charcoal processing site looks like on the mountain now. Not very obvious, but in the LIDAR images, of course, they're very easy to spot. What is a coal blast furnace? This gives you an idea. This particular one shows an undershot water wheel. You see the two bellows. The iron is made in the hearth, but the hearth is filled from the top with charcoal, with iron ore, and with limestone, which acts as the flux. And then when it reaches about 3,000 degrees, the iron is tapped and it comes out into the sand moles or pigs, and from there it is post-processed or cast, either kept as a pig or cast as a stove, a pot, a salt pan, any number of objects. This illustration shows the tapping of the furnace with producing pig iron, and you can see the guttermen directing the hot molten iron into the troughs that were in the sand floor and to produce the pigs that would then cool. So what did Catoctin make? They made jam stoves. This is a jam stove plate on the left, marked 1776, J. Johnson, which stands for James Johnson and Company. And then on the right is a 6-plate cast iron stove. And you can see the very detailed iconography on the stove. This particular one is down at Old Salem and is just a beautiful example of the craftsmanship for which Catoctin stoves were known. One of the things that we realized in our analysis, in our reparative heritage quest, is that there had been quite over time, the changes in the buildings and the changes in the interpretation of the buildings were immense. This particular structure was known as the Mule Barn. And when we were, and unfortunately it does not stand anymore. It's an archaeological site now. But looking at this photo, we realized that one does not put 3 chimneys in a barn ever. And so even though it had been repurposed as a barn, as a mule barn, it was in fact one of the enslaved quarters, 3 bay, 3 structures, 3 dwellings, let's put it that way, in one stone structure with a 1.5 story with 3 chimneys. And you can see that the doors had been made larger for the mules. So that gave us quite a bit of information about where at least some of the enslaved were living at Catoctin. One of the things that we've been looking at using our LiDAR and our view shed analysis tools is how the owners of the furnace could have a panoptic view of the operation and therefore control through that observation, control the activities of the enslaved at Catoctin. The Ironmaster's mansion was positioned in such a way that there was an unobstructed view, not only of the furnace operation itself, but also the enslaved quarters. But not just that mansion had an unobstructed view, two other mansions did as well. So these mansions that ring the site were positioned so that the owners would always be able to watch not only during the day, but at night as well, what their enslaved workers were doing. Keep in mind that Catoctin is less than 10 miles from the Pennsylvania line. And so there was always the possibility of being able to cross that line after, while slavery was still allowed, legal in Maryland, but not in Pennsylvania and northern states. We're looking at the environmental impact of the furnace, not just on the landscape, but on the people who worked there. We know that zinc oxide is associated with metal fume fever. This is something the British studied at length. And also the possibility of Lou Gehrig, what we now call Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS, which can result from being exposed to heavy metals such as iron and manganese. So we've undertaken an XRF study of our iron, and as you can see here, we have a large amount of zinc in our iron, which would be depending on what you were doing at the furnace, it could get into your body and therefore into your bones. And we actually, I'll talk about this in a little while, we have one individual that we actually call Zinc Man because he is completely, his bones are completely impregnated with zinc. So how do we know, something about the bones of the enslaved? It's because in 1979, the State Highway Administration was planning to build a second lane on US Route 15, also known as the Catoctin Mountain Highway. And in so doing, as part of Section 106 of the Historic Preservation Act of 1966, they uncovered, or the Phase 1 investigation located a cemetery. The State Highway Administration did not move the road. Something that would not happen today. Today, I'm certain the road would be moved, but in 1979, it was not. And the decision was made to excavate the part of the cemetery that was going to be disturbed by the roadway construction, which was about a third of the cemetery. And this image shows the green being the area that was excavated and the red being the area that is still extant in the cemetery. And you can see the northbound lane of Route 15. When the excavation took place, when the cemetery was located, the mitigation was an excavation of 1/3 of the cemetery. 35 graves were uncovered. 33 individuals were present in those graves. 2 graves did not have any skeletal material in them or skeletons in them because of the they were probably children and their skeletons did not survive. But this image shows you where the 35 graves are located and the northbound lane of Route 15 off to the left. When the excavation took place in 1979, it was really in excellent standards by 1979 methodology. Complete with even saving soil samples from the thoracic and area and the crania. We have been reanalyzing those the artifacts that were found, and of course the skeletons as well. The principal artifacts were nails. There were no sort of grave goods, if you will, but there were nails from the coffins, and they range from hand-wrought rosehead nails to cut nails. So we have a range of time periods from the late 18th through the second quarter of the 19th century. The bones that you see in the middle, the long bones, the femur, are bowed. That's because we have incidents of rickets at Catoctin. This could be both genetic, but it also could be from lack of sunshine, or diet. But we know that the air at Catoctin was very much compromised by the iron operation, a great deal of smoke, a great deal of haze. And so sunlight would be lack of sunlight could be a factor, if you will, in the incidence of rickets. We also have sickle cell genes in several of our individuals. There were a few artifacts in the hair, hair fasteners like pins, copper objects were present. And you can see two examples here. Straight pins used to secure hairstyles. And a few buttons. Only the men had buttons. The women would have had tapes. There were no buttons with any of the women. And these buttons are bone, brass. Some would have had fabric over them. And those were, as I said, mostly jackets and pants on the men. So the demography of our population is very interesting. Naturally, as we would expect, we get very young children dying. Lots of reasons, but the younger you are and the smaller you are, the more susceptible you are to early death if you become ill or you have any other factor like the sickle cell gene. And we do know that two of our neonates had the sickle cell gene, which probably is what caused their mortality. The other thing about our population that's incredibly interesting is that we have a very high incidence of teenagers between the ages of 10 and 19 dying. And this is not a population that one expects to die at a high rate. What we think we have is incidents of overwork, lack of nutrition, basically working to death. And this would, if you were overworked and underfed, if you became ill, you're more likely to die, not just not be able to bounce back and recover as you would if you were young at that age, a teenager, and you were in a healthy situation. One of the things that we are trying to do, of course, in our reparative heritage work is identify these individuals, which is very difficult to do. We are managing to get some first names. We have not been able to connect with any of the names with the individuals in the cemetery, of course, but we're able to come up with first names of individuals that we know were Catoctin. And we're also able to put together some families through diaries, through letters, and through some of the court records, that land records and probate records. So for instance, we know, or we think that the Charity is the daughter of Lucky, and that Eliza is also the daughter of Lucky. We think that Jane is the wife of Big Dick, and that Will is the son of Big Dick. So you can see how we're putting together these family units from our data and hoping that we'll be able to fill in the blanks and identify these people in further. When we began our reanalysis of the cemetery about 7 years ago, DNA, or 7.5 years ago, we had a grant that would have allowed us to do 2 DNA samples because it was incredibly expensive. Now, of course, it's, much more, commonplace, obviously. But at the time, we only had funding for 2. But what we did have funding for was a classification and analysis of the crania. For years, there has been a craniometric database, and that has been somewhat successful at identifying the origin within the African continent of particular individuals and groups based on their very detailed measurements in their crania. So we did a craniometric analysis and found that we had possibly individuals from the Gold Coast, some Zulu, and some Ashanti. So this is a database that we are hoping to be able to compare to the DNA, which I'll get to in a minute. But again, this was a very, shall we say, rough cut, if you will, of analysis. But at the time we started the reanalysis, it was the only thing we had. And this craniometric analysis pointed to burials on the east coast of Africa, Zanzibar, Tanzania, South Africa, and then on the west coast at the in the Gold Coast, Ghana, and Nigeria. In the population of Catoctin, we have a condition called Craniostenosis, and it's a very rare condition, but we have 6 out of our 33 individuals who share this condition. And at the time we began the reanalysis, we did not realize, because we didn't have the DNA, that these people were in fact all related. Now, however, we know that they are. And these are some examples of the elongation of the skull that is the result of the premature closure of the suture in the crania that manifests itself in different ways, but in this case, at Catoctin, in an elongation of the skull. So we partnered with the Reich Lab at Harvard because, for one thing, they have more money than they know what to do with. And I shouldn't say that, but it's true. And they were willing to do a complete human genome for 14 of our individuals. And when those were successful, they were willing to do a full human genome of 15 additional. So 29 human genome, of which 27 were successful. So it's a very high number, and it's allowed us now to be able to identify the haploid groups that you see here and the actual families. So we have 5 families in the cemetery. We have a mother, her son, her brother. We have a brother, sister, and father. We have other, individual. Well, we have 5 families is what I'm not going to go into each detail of each of the families, but we've been able to clearly and absolutely identify 5 families within the cemetery. What is interesting, though, I'll go back to this slide. We also have what we call morphometric outliers. These are generally older men. They are not related to anyone in the cemetery. And one of our hypotheses is that these morphometric outliers could have been brought to Catoctin with specific iron making skills. They are, as I said, not related to anyone. And in the cemetery landscape, they are buried away from the family groups. So morphometric outliers in life, outliers in the cemetery at death. We are looking, of course, not just at the enslaved at Catoctin, but also at the workers who were coming in from Europe, the European American workers, because we see that some of our enslaved population, their fathers were white, and we're trying to figure out if, obviously what the relationship is between the European Americans and the African Americans. We've looked at the rest of the cemetery. We have no intention of excavating it. It's privately owned. It's not going to be disturbed in any way, but we did do a ground penetrating radar survey of the remainder of the cemetery to see where additional graves were. And as you can see, the blue boxes indicate possible burials. The small squares are surface stones, and there are pathways through the cemetery, as you can see. So the cemetery does have, it is quite a bit larger than what was excavated in 1979. This is one of the stones. There's no typical stone in the cemetery. They were chosen, some are rounded, some are pointed, some are cryptocrystalline and reflect light, some are, they're all locally sourced stones. And we can confirm through our DNA purposeful grave placement, of course, and the familiar groupings. We work with Silver Oak Academy. It's our partner school. They're located in Kemar, just over the line in Carroll County, about 20 minutes from Catoctin. The students there are primarily, they're at-risk students that are in the juvenile justice, Department of Juvenile Justice, but they are very much part of our program. They are learning historic preservation building trades. We're doing historic culinary work. They are partners in our archaeology. They're partners in our living history program. They're partners in our historic kitchen garden. They're partners in everything. This is a picture, a photograph of some of the students at the Smithsonian with Dr. Douglas Owsley. I got a grant several years ago to do 2 forensic facial reconstructions. So we selected a 15-year-old young man. This young man, when he died, his spine was already compressed from heavy and repetitive labor. Had he lived, he would have been bent double as an older man. Unfortunately, he died at the age of 15. Again, very unusual for a teenager in the prime of their life to die, probably overwork. There's no apparent reason or morphology in his bones that would tell us why he died. Something killed him pretty quickly. But it wasn't an accident or something like that. There was not, any trauma, if you will, to his skeleton that would tell us what killed him. I will say that one thing that could have killed him is a snake bite, because the Catoctin Mountains have both timber rattlers and copperheads, and without proper treatment, either of those, especially if you're in a weakened state, or depending on where you're bitten, can be fatal. The second forensic facial reconstruction that we have done is a 35-year-old mother. She is buried, her infant is buried above her, on top of her. Her infant may have lived for 2 or 3 months after she died, but then her infant died. And then she also has a young brother in the cemetery. So again, a family unit. I was talking about our Heritage at Work program with Silver Oak Academy. They help us restore the structures, maintain the structures. This is one of the historic fences that they built. It's a really cool program. This is one of the historic kitchen gardens that they maintain. But this is behind the log house. They do open hearth cooking with our volunteers. And are some of them in front of the Forgeman's house that they restored top to bottom and is now open as an Airbnb. We are very thrilled that in 2022, the Smithsonian Channel Mission Critical film Enslaved by Iron will premiere on the Smithsonian Channel. It is a 44-minute documentary about Catoctin and the enslaved who worked there. So stay tuned for that. It's going to be really an amazing film. The Museum of the Ironworker is open every weekend. It has not only the forensic facial reconstructions, but it also has many objects of iron. You can visit us during our Maryland Iron Festival, May 21 and 22. It's a great way to come to Catoctin and learn about iron making. We also have annual events like Spirits of the Furnace. All of these events are geared toward giving voice to the people who actually lived and worked at Catoctin, the enslaved and freed African Americans, as well as the Europeans. And at the holidays this year on December 3rd, we have our traditional village Christmas. We have a great many partners that we would like to acknowledge, including the Reich Laboratory at Harvard, the Smithsonian, Winterthur, of course, the Maryland Historical Trust, the Andrew Mellon Fund, Johns Hopkins, and just a myriad of people. Please visit us. We're 12610 Catoctin Furnace Road. That's the Museum of the Ironworker. And that's our website, catoctinfurnace.org. We're happy to put you on our email list for 1 email a month to find out what we're up to. And I'm happy to, I know I've gone over a little bit, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. So I will stop.
Elizabeth, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And I think we all need to go up and visit you.
We would love that.
I'm putting that on my list, definitely. I already marked down May 21st to go up there for Iron Days, so that's going to be great.
Yep, and if you want to make a special, trip with your group, then just give us a call, contact us. Mm-hmm.
All right, we're going to do that. We had Jeff mentioned earlier on about when you were going through the demography of the death. Would the younger slaves also been given or the enslaved younger people been given riskier jobs? Would that have been something?
We don't have, that's an interesting question. We don't have evidence of that. The enslaved, skilled ironworkers were very valuable. This is every aspect of making iron, from making charcoal to being a filler, to being a gutter man, to being a blacksmith, a forger, a founder. Everything is a skill, and it's a major skill. So you would, when we think of enslavement, often we think of unskilled, which is I don't think true anywhere, but anyway, that's been the idea. But I can tell you that iron making is an extremely skilled profession. So you would want these people alive and healthy, and working hard. So it isn't, we think it's more overwork, where you would work and work and work and work. And if you worked over, then you were paid a little bit. And the incentive there, of course, was just to work even harder and longer, because that little bit of money that you would get through overwork could help you buy your freedom or the freedom of one of your family members. So we don't think there was intentional neglect, if you will. I mean, well, the whole thing is, just horrific. But you would want, you wouldn't want, you wouldn't want to necessarily sacrifice, if you will, any of these workers, in my opinion.
And if anybody has a question for Elizabeth, you can raise your hand and I can acknowledge you to unmute, or you can put it in the chat box if you have anything for her. I had a question, and then maybe I missed it. Was the excavated bodies, were they reburied?
No, the individuals that were removed from the cemetery in 1979 are at the Smithsonian, where they have been since 1979, and they've been just as well taken care of as anything could be. You know, so that's where they are.
Are there any plans to put I don't know what the correct word is, but
repatriate, that would really be up to, in my opinion, that would be up to the descendant community, which is what we're hoping with our DNA, to be able to identify individuals who are the descendant community.
Yeah, that's what she asked. Are there no known descendants to claim?
Someone was asking what the charcoal was. The charcoal is the fuel. That's the fuel for the iron. Yes, strange that you need to burn wood to make charcoal and burn charcoal to make iron, but that's exactly what you did. And then the stove to burn wood. Yep. I'm reading the chat. You guys, this is great. Yes, the slaves were mining the iron. It's hematite and goethite, and that they were the iron there at Catoctin is very close to the surface. It's about 10 to 12 feet below. It's where Catoctin is literally, when you come out, you'll see it's at the toe of the mountain. So you have the iron ore is closer to the surface, which made it, you know, easier, somewhat easier. You didn't have to dig quite as deep. And there was a question here about the younger slaves that might have tried to escape more often, might have faced more harsh discipline. It's possible. Again, we do not have, within the skeletal remains, we don't have any injury or break, you know, like broken bones or anything like we don't have, interestingly enough. So it's whatever, you know, the mother obviously died in childbirth. I mean, that's pretty obvious. And then the daughter, the son died, you know, soon thereafter. But yeah, I mean, we just don't know. One of my dreams is to do plaque analysis, which probably will tell us about more. Well, obviously it'll tell us more about nutrition, and could tell us about disease processes that would show up in the plaque of the teeth that do not show up in the bones. So we're hoping to do that in the future. They were practicing sustainable forestry, if you will. They were replanting the trees, and every 30 years approximately reusing the same charcoal hearths. So the trees would grow up about 30 years, they cut them down again. So it was on a 30-year cycle of charcoal production in the mountain after the first cut of the prime, you know, the original hardwood. How many graves did you find and what proportion are African? They're all African. Everyone in the cemetery is African. One girl has a white father, others have more and less what we call European admixture, but everyone is of African ancestry.
And Dirisha asks, has there ever been a connection with descendants of Thomas Johnson's family, and have they been engaged with the exhibit or site?
Yes, they have. We have a great many owner families who are very interested in knowing whether they are in fact you know, descended from a combination of whether their ancestors were you know, fathers of some of the, related to the enslaved. Yes, they're very interested. Everybody wants to know. Black, white, it's the real question. So you have
And
to
how
tune
is
in.
the work?
You have to tune into the documentary. That's all I can say. I can't say anymore.
So the work that's being done here is it being replicated in other sites throughout the states, or is this a trailblazing? Are y'all the first to do these facial recognitions and the DNA? Because obviously you had the exhumed, bodies,
Well,
and I don't think that's something that's available in other places.
Well, Catoctin is the only industrial enslavement cemetery anywhere. So it's a unique resource. And that is one of the reasons that it's yielding so much information, because there is no other. And there won't be. If this cemetery were found tomorrow, we would not excavate it. We absolutely would not excavate it. It would be unethical. The road would be moved. But this is an accident of history that in 1979, frankly, the State Highway Administration didn't care. It was a different world, and they just weren't going to move the road. So they said the graves have to go. And they didn't look for the descendant community. They didn't care about it. It was just a different world. But the archaeologists did a great job, and the Smithsonian's done a great job. And our partners in this process of reanalysis are the Arch Society, which is the African American Society in Frederick County, and our other partners throughout Maryland and beyond are very supportive of what we're trying to do in this reanalysis. But this would never happen again, and nor should it.
Right. Have there been any evidence of Native Americans in and around the area as well?
Well, absolutely. The Piscataway, the Tuscarora, the Five Nation Iroquois, they were all there. And the Susquehannocks, absolutely, moving through that area regularly. Interestingly enough, though, while there is evidence in many places of African American and Native American admixing, we do not have any individuals in our cemetery who are Native American, any Native American blood, DNA at all, none. Which is very surprising, frankly.
And it was African and not Caribbean or any other.
Well, they're of African ancestry, but that doesn't mean they didn't come through the Caribbean or come through the Canary Islands or come through England. That's something we don't know yet.
David has his hand up to ask you a question, Elizabeth.
Yes.
So I'm aware that there are probably lots of charcoal pits that are outside of the 12,000 acres that you said were, used by the forge. Do you have any idea what was done with the charcoal that was produced in those in the wider region? Or was it all sold to the forge?
It was all heading for Catoctin, but there were, outside of the furnace lands, what we call the greater furnace lands, there were a few hearths that that owned that land they were making charcoal and selling it to the furnace. But by and large, the furnace owned 12,000 plus acres. They had plenty of, it takes an acre of hardwood to fuel the furnace for one day. An acre of hardwood. So it's a lot of charcoaling. It's a lot of wood, but we've calculated how often they reused the hearths and how often they moved, but it was they had 12,000 acres. It's, they had plenty of land, of forest land with which to make charcoal. And somebody's asking if the same owners of the mines and the furnaces, yes, they was vertically integrated. They had everything. They even had farms where they were producing, they had animals, cows, and they had orchards and wheat fields, and, yeah, they had everything. It was a huge complex.
Has the charcoal been analyzed to see what wood it was that they were doing, and if the wood, the reforestation wood, was similar to that which was being taken down, or did it change the
No, they
configuration of
changed the wood, and actually Rob Warner, who's one of the archaeologists who works with me, gave a paper on this. I'm going to say 2 years ago. The native hardwood was, and I can't remember because I'm not going to say it because I'll say it wrong, but the chestnut oak and oak were burned, and then they they replanted with, I can't remember, but they absolutely were replanting with a different wood that was more, it might have been hemlock and hickory, which grow faster, but don't quote me on that. But they definitely modified the entire mountain with trees that would grow faster and then were harvested for the next iteration of charcoal. Yes.
Interesting. And are they? I guess that could have changed the whole the ecosystem.
It did.
And
it absolutely. It changed the whole mountain. I don't think it was ash, but don't, again, you'll have to have Rob give the paper. He gave it at the ASM. No, not ASM. He gave it at the Mid-Atlantics, I think.
Yeah, that would be a fascinating.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah.
Any other questions for Elizabeth? Linda?
So can you still see evidence? I know you said about the charcoal areas, you could still find those, maybe not easily, but
yeah, no, you can walk with the LiDAR, with the LiDAR and handheld GPS, you can walk right to them because we know where they are. They're throughout the parks, which are now, the 12,000 acres is now national park and state park. But when you're hiking, if you see a flattened area, you can be pretty sure it's about 25, 30 feet across.
Okay. And what about the mines? Are those evident?
Those are, because they're very clear in the LiDAR. And again, they're in the park.
Interesting.
Elizabeth, would you just in case folks don't know what LiDAR is, can you just say what that is again?
Sure, it's laser detection and imaging. It's from a platform, usually an airplane, could be a satellite, but usually an airplane. From an airborne platform, a radar beam is bounced to the earth, and then it goes back to the receiver, and the rate at which it bounces back is very precise, and it can show extremely minute variations in the soil surface. It's a bare earth, so it takes off. We can do a bare earth model with it, so it takes off, houses and trees and all that sort of canopy. It goes right through it, and it's an excellent way. It's the archaeologist's best friend now, because it shows us what we otherwise wouldn't see.
Aren't there ways that the common folk, just like you and I, can access some LiDAR data and look at our areas or different areas?
Well, there's LiDAR commercially available on the web, but we actually process our own LiDAR using a very expensive program, frankly. And so our images are much more detailed. And LiDAR is usually provided by each county, in Maryland. I think every county in Maryland has LiDAR.
Kay was asking who provides the LiDAR tech for you.
You mean the program that we use? Agisoft? Is that what you mean? You
Kay,
mean,
what specifically are you looking for?
oh,
Oh,
okay,
that was it.
yes.
The other thing I was wondering is with the students that are working with you, have you had any objections to being portrayed as a slave in the reenactors? I would think there might be some hard feelings or
Well, first of
situations.
all, they don't, they're not always enslaved, like the butler. There were free African Americans at Catoctin as well. So we do not specifically cast them as enslaved, but also it's part of their history program. They write essays and they do individual research and essays about their experience and their feelings and their what they're doing. So it's very much part of their curriculum. It's not just us saying, oh, please, go out and portray, a gravedigger or a miner or a butler or a worshiper. Those are just some of the roles, and they are so yeah, it's first of all, they are not necessarily enslaved, and secondly, it's part of their history, social studies, whatever you want to call it, curriculum. Yes, and you can see the LiDAR in the DNR GIS site, Merlin, and it's pretty good. It's not, it's not, it's not what we produce, but it's good. It depends on what you're looking for, quite frankly. And the house servants in the mansions, absolutely, yes, there were in all of them, and even after slavery was outlawed in Maryland in 1864. They stayed, some of them stayed. So again, I mean, I know we've gone on, but if you want to come for a visit, that would be great. We would welcome that, and you know where to find me. And if you'd like to,
we might be I said, we're going to come knocking on your door, Elizabeth.
okay. And if you'd like to be on our mailing list, just shoot me an email, or you can go on our website and sign up. My email is ecomer @catoctinfurnace.org, ECOMER @catoctinfurnace.org, or you can just go on our website. And thank you. I appreciate it. Great questions. And thank you for putting that in chat. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to welcoming you to Catoctin Furnace as a group or individually.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. We take care, and everybody, we hope to see you soon. And let us know if you want to get involved with different volunteer efforts. They're our heart and our soul, as Elizabeth can account for. We love our volunteers. So everybody stay safe, stay well, and stay curious. Take care.
Thank you.